Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. I hope you enjoy my video, and if you don't, I'm very sorry. It's going to be the last time I use that intro for these videos. We're entering into a new era for this channel. In this new era, I will be less apologetic for my bad videos. I will be standing up. And furthermore, I will be taking on the role of an intergalactic time-traveling space pirate cowboy pro wrestler with a 9-ton deadlift. We're just going to have to accept that. Before I became the time-traveling intergalactic space pirate cowboy pro wrestler with a 9-ton deadlift that I am today, I was a 90s kid. And you know how us 90s kids are. We ate all of our snacks out of tubes. All of our technology came in colorful, transparent plastic. And we grew up in the wake of global war and state paranoia and entered into adulthood just in time to inherit a fundamentally broken economy marred by increasingly dire economic stratification and an imminently dying planet. And the only way that we could find some sliver of solace is by returning to the simpler, gentler years of our irreclaimable youth. By watching cartoons. Well, since this is being retroactively uploaded to the year 2023, all my fellow 90s kids have had at least a solid decade to shamble their way through adulthood, and some are even having babies on purpose. And if there's any cartoon that you immediately associate with people in their 30s having babies, it's Rugrats. That's right. Can you believe that after all this time, we're the same ages as the grown-ups in that cartoon? That's how time works. It feels like it was just yesterday I was a toddler myself going on imagination adventures with Tommy and the rest of the babies. But now, I find myself much more identifying with Stu, because much like him, I also want to raw dog Dee Dee Pickles. However, if you revisit the Rugrats as an adult, there is one inescapable question you will inevitably find yourself asking, and we all know what it is. Which of the Rugrats parents were Trump supporters? I know. It's almost cliche to even ask the question at this point. It's like, we get it. Why didn't the Eagles just take the ring to Mount Doom? Why didn't Obi-Wan Kenobi recognize R2-D2 in A New Hope? Did Chaz Finster vote for Donald Trump in 2020? Well, I wanted to finally put an end to the discussion once and for all. Now, if you're expecting this to segue into me marathoning every episode of Rugrats in order to build an extensive and cohesive psychological profile for each of the Rugrats grown-ups, that wouldn't be an unreasonable assumption to make. After all, this is a YouTube video about a cartoon for literal babies. However, the Rugrats media franchise consists of 172 episodes of Rugrats, along with 55 episodes of All Grown Up, 37 episodes of the 2021 Rugrats revival, and 3 feature-length movies, which altogether would take me over 4 solid days of uninterrupted watching to be able to get through. And while I may be able to travel freely through time, my own lifespan does remain woefully finite, and the more time that I spend watching Rugrats, the less time that I can spend, for example, visiting the planet Daedalus, where all the aliens look, sound, and act exactly like Dee Dee Pickles, and they're stupid horny all the time. Instead, we're going to rely on a combination of factors to get us as accurate an assessment as possible. This will include information from the Rugrats fandom wiki, voter demographic results from the 2016 and 2020 elections, and just a small dash of intuition. First, let's establish where the Rugrats' parents live. We learn in the first episode, Tommy's First Birthday, that the street address of Stu and Dee Dee's home is 1258 North Highland. Now, while there is no city or state listed, we know that this is the same street address as the Klasky Supro production company in Los Angeles, California. Given additional hints such as trips to the beach, the Grand Canyon, and Las Vegas, as well as the fact that Dee Dee takes Tommy to her class that she teaches at Yucaipa High School, we're going to place the Pickles household somewhere in the LA area. Betty and Howard DeVille are next-door neighbors to Stu and Dee Dee. Randy and Lucy Carmichael eventually move in across the street from them, and it's safe to assume that Drew and Charlotte Pickles, along with Chaz and Kira Finster, are not making extended trips for the sake of visiting as often as they do. So, easy enough for all of the Rugrats parents, we will be considering voter demographic results from Los Angeles County in both the 2016 and 2020 elections to determine the likelihoods of which ones would have voted for or against Donald Trump. Next, let's consider their ages. In both the original 1991 as well as 2021 iterations of the show, the Rugrats' parents are all in their early to mid-30s. However, since this is a video for my fellow 90s kids, we'll be going based off of their dates of birth in the original series, which has them all born between the years of 1957 and 59, placing them squarely in the baby boomer generation. So by the time both the 2016 and 2020 elections roll around, they're all in their late 50s to early 60s. So before we look into each Rugrats parents more specifically, let's take a look at these more broad factors to get a general base estimation of their likelihood to have voted for Donald Trump. Per LA County election results, Donald Trump took only 22% of the vote in 2016 and about 27% in 2020. Now remember, even though this is a pretty hefty drubbing electorally, this still means that for every 10 voters in LA County, anywhere from 2 to nearly 3 of those voters would have broken for Donald Trump. To help put that into perspective, that's the same percentage of Americans who have never tried anal. More granular voter demographic information from LA County specifically isn't available, so while it's unideal, we'll have to rely a bit on national voter demographic results going forward. Perhaps you feel this will compromise the integrity of the resulting findings. Nationally, older voters broke for Trump 51 to 45% in 2016 and 53 to 47% in 2020, a much more narrow break. Based on this, we'll start all of the Rugrats parents off with a strong but not insurmountable likelihood of not voting for Donald Trump. Okay, so let's take a look at the Rugrats parents more specifically, starting with, for no particular reason whatsoever, everyone's favorite animated sex symbol, and not just mine, Dee Dee Pickles. White women showed a slight break for Trump in 2016, with a majority then voting for him in 2020, going from 47 to 53%. I don't know for sure, but I'm also pretty sure that she's a college graduate, a group that overwhelmingly broke away from Trump in both elections. Aggregating this information, it's pretty safe to say Dee Dee Pickles would not have voted for Donald Trump in 2016. See, the X factor for Dee Dee is her unwavering dedication to the teachings of Dr. Werner Lipschitz, a child psychologist who was eventually revealed to be a total hack. Despite this, Dee Dee relies on his teachings for at least another 10 years. Quack doctors broke hard for Trump in 2020, thanks primarily to COVID denialism and vaccine skepticism. And even if Dr. Lipschitz himself may no longer be in the spotlight at 79 years old, it seems likely that Dee Dee would have at least become fixated on some other quack doctor. So with that in mind, I'm going to say that Dee Dee would most likely have voted for Trump's re-election in 2020. Moving on to possibly the most enviable man in all of fiction, Dee Dee's husband, Stu. White men broke hard for Trump, particularly in 2016, by a whopping 30-point margin, and a lesser but still substantial 17% margin in 2020. Given Stu's status as an engineer and toy maker, I think it's safe to assume that he also has a college degree. So we have two heavy anti-Trump breaks based on county and educational status, a heavy pro-Trump break based on race and gender, and a moderate pro-Trump break based on age. I can't think of any particular pro-Trump proclivities he may be susceptible to, as unlike Dee Dee, he doesn't seem to invest much faith in the teaching of Dr. Lipschitz. Although, if we accept that Dee Dee's going to break for Trump in 2020, it does seem more likely that a married couple would vote for the same candidate, considering that only about 20% of married couples are inter-party. I'm going to say Stu breaks with Dee Dee on this one and votes for Biden in 2020. This may put some strain on their marriage, but personally I'm okay with doing that. They've had 30 happy years, which is a pretty good run. Charlotte and Drew Pickles share a lot in common with the other Pickles household, although there are no noted Dr. Lipschitz fans here to tip the scales. So, just like before, we see moderate to large pro-Trump swings based on race, gender, and age, and pretty heavy anti-Trump swings based on educational status and county. However, what sets Charlotte and Drew apart from Dee Dee and Stu is income. Dee Dee is mostly a stay-at-home mother, and Stu was a freelance inventor. Meanwhile, Charlotte is a CEO of a major international conglomerate literally named Megacorporation, and Drew is an accountant. While Charlotte was eventually ousted from her position as CEO, I think it's likely she would have eventually picked herself up and found another high-paying executive position before she and Drew eventually retired to Florida. You look at these two and tell me that they are not spending their retirement going to Disney World every opportunity they get. Of course they are. And as someone who regretfully spent most of his life in Florida before eventually leaving Earth entirely, I'm telling you that these two are unflinching, full-blown QAnon believers. There is not a single doubt in my mind that Drew spends his weekends selling MAGA flags and Let's Go Brandon shirts across the street from Waffle House. Charlotte and Drew are at the Capitol on January 6th. Drew pays for Twitter Blue and has a lot of opinions about cancel culture, especially since we can all agree that Angelica would definitely have been recorded having a screaming meltdown at a retail worker and gone viral in a Karen compilation video, and her parents would definitely take her side and tell her that she was right and that wokeism is a cancer. These two support Trump so much, even other Trump supporters are a little uncomfortable about it. Grandpa Lou, being born in 1915, is long dead by the time Trump runs for office. Leaving the Pickles family, let's take a look at the Finsters, Chaz and Kira. While Chaz shares much in common demographically with Stu and Drew, Kira, being Asian American, is significantly more likely to vote for the Democratic candidate in 2016 and 2020 than Dee or Charlotte would be to vote for Trump. Unlike Kira, though, Chaz has kind of a wimpy, cowardly, paranoid vibe about him, which I think makes him pretty vulnerable to Trump's fear-mongering style of campaigning, particularly during the BLM protests of 2020. Regardless, I think he would probably still end up voting for Biden in 2020 if it weren't for the fact that he definitely dies of COVID before getting the opportunity. Look, the guy's in his 60s, he has asthma and probably some other health complications. There's no way he's making it out of COVID alive. Kira probably still makes it out okay and votes for Biden in 2020. Next, let's take a look at the DeVilles. Based on the dynamics of their relationship, I don't think there's any way that Howard is voting for anyone other than who Betty is, so let's focus on her. Like Dee, she's a white woman living in the suburbs of Los Angeles, so she has a strong bias against Donald Trump. We also know that she considers herself something of a feminist, growing up in the 70s and still wearing a sweater with the symbol for Venus on it. While it was never confirmed in the original series, it was a fairly common assumption that Betty was in some form or another part of the LGBTQ community. She wears more gender nonconforming clothes than the other mothers in the show. She has interests that are generally considered masculine, such as sports and pro wrestling, and her queer status was eventually canonized in the 2021 version of the show, where she mentions having an ex-girlfriend. Donald Trump took only 13% of the LGBTQ vote in 2016. This increased slightly come 2020, but still, the overwhelming majority of queer voters tend to side with Democrats, for what's generally considered pretty obvious reasons. Now, I know what you're thinking. Yes, Betty identifies as a feminist, but she's also definitely transphobic. And while I agree that transphobia is a very wide gateway into broader conservative ideology, and it's super easy to imagine Betty voting for a Republican and rationalizing it as, well, at least they know what a woman is, anti-trans rhetoric was not a linchpin in Donald Trump's campaign strategy. Not to say that it wasn't there. Point is, while Betty may be more likely to vote for a Republican in 2022 or even 2024 after anti-trans bigotry becomes the central pillar of the Republican platform, I think for both Trump elections, she is more of a vagina hat feminist and falls safely in the Democratic camp. Finally, we come to Randy and Lucy Carmichael, and look, I'm not going to beat around the bush here. There's almost no way that either of these two are voting for Trump in either election. Not only do we have a strong anti-Trump swing in LA County, but Black Americans are consistently voting for Democrats by upwards of 90%. This rate is even higher among Black women specifically, who voted for Biden by a whopping 95% to Trump's 5%. Lucy is also a doctor and a Harvard graduate, and we've already established the role that educational status plays in voting likelihoods. Randy is a TV writer, which is a field that is typically associated with liberalism. And look, like I said, this is the biggest blowout of any of the Rugrats parents. I can't even really make it funny. Like, it was a little funny when I was talking about how, like, Charlotte and Drew were gonna retire to Florida, right? I'm not saying it's the funniest thing that you've ever heard in your life, but, not bad for a small YouTube channel that you probably never heard of before. Maybe worth subscribing or see how this goes. Anyway, yeah, the Carmichael's they're probably not voting for Trump. And I think I've done it. After all this time, I hope we can finally put this debate to rest. Of the 10 Rugrats parents in 2016, only 2 of them, Charlotte and Drew Pickles, are likely to be voting for Donald Trump. This matches up approximately with the 22% of the LA County vote he received in 2016, even if Charlotte and Drew themselves are no longer in California come retirement. And in 2020, we only have 1 likely defector with Dee Dee Pickles, which brings us to the approximate 30% of the vote he received that same year, motivated primarily by her near-religious adherence to the teachings of fraudulent doctors. If only she would religiously adhere her mouth to my... I'm really sorry. I've been really inappropriate today. Like, I've just been making a bunch of comments about Dee Dee, the whole video, all right? And that's not why you clicked on this video. You saw a video about Rugrats parents voting for Trump and thought that that would be maybe a silly bit. And here I am, I'm just talking about busting nuts into Dee Dee Pickles the whole time. Look, I'll admit that perhaps I have what could be considered an unhealthy sexual obsession with this particular cartoon woman, but it's not just me. Lots of people, given it's more common in the space future with the planet of lustful deities that I mentioned earlier. Look, the point that I'm making is that if you or someone that you know looks like Dee Dee Pickles, please, my Twitter is @Nuvamata. I'm begging you.